Riley.
All right, let's turn now to member of the House Armed Services Committee on more serious matters, Democratic Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado. He's just returned from a congressional trip to the Middle East, which included a visit to the Syrian-Jordan border. Also with us is the White House NBC News correspondent Hans Nichols and journalist in residence at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, Elise Labott. Good morning to you all. Congressman, I'll start with you. You're an Army Ranger, platoon leader with the 82nd Airborne. You served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Just as a soldier, I want you to think, if you could, for our viewers about those special operators, the American special operators who were serving in Syria, who got the surprise phone call to stand down and stand aside yesterday morning. What are they thinking today?
Yeah. You know, when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, I worked all the time with Iraqi forces, Afghan forces, not because it was important, but because it was essential. I mean, we could not have accomplished the mission without these forces. You know, they know the culture, they know the history, they know the terrain, they know the language. You know, we need those folks to get the mission done. And, you know, today, everyone's waking up, and those forces are thinking that the American handshake doesn't matter. You know, the message that Donald Trump just sent to people around the world is that the American handshake doesn't matter. You know, we have Rangers on the ground, we have Green Berets on the ground that have been fighting alongside these forces for years, that have been making promises to these forces that if you fight with us, if you stand shoulder to shoulder with us, we will take care of you and your families. And today we are less safe because of the actions of the president.
And Congressman, you fought alongside, shoulder to shoulder, with local soldiers. What is those members of the SDF, the Syrian Defense Forces, Democratic Forces, excuse me, a lot of them wear American flags on their uniforms because they do fight side by side. What have we left them to now by stepping aside with the president's decision?
Well, we're putting them in a terrible position. You know, if Turkey moves south and invades these Turkish areas, these Kurdish-controlled areas, you know, we are potentially leaving them and their families to slaughter. You know, there is the national security element here for the United States, but there's also the moral element. These are people we've made promises to. These are people that have risked their lives and their families' lives to fight with us, again, because U.S. soldiers have made promises to them. And now we're sitting here potentially leaving them on their own. You know, it is astonishing on so many levels. But there's also the national security element here. You know, this idea that there are about 11,000 ISIS fighters. 11,000. And these are the most battle-hardened ISIS fighters. These are the people that have fought to the end in Raqqa. That are currently being held in makeshift prisons all along northern Syria. These prisons are entirely controlled by the SDF forces. You know, they're sitting here guarding these people. If Turkey moves south, what's going to happen is these SDF forces will abandon their posts to try to fight and defend themselves and their families. These prisons will be unguarded. These 11,000 ISIS fighters will evaporate into Syria and for the rest of the world. Many of them are from places around the world, and that will be an extreme risk for all of us.
So, Congressman, people in the know, in the Pentagon, your former colleagues, many of them, they know that ISIS has certainly not been defeated. They know that the Kurds, the Kurdish troops, were among our strongest, most ferocious allies in combating ISIS on the ground in northern Syria. And America's role in the world, is it not larger than our handshake to the Kurds? What about troops who are on the ground with us from France, from Germany, from the Netherlands, throughout that region, throughout the world? What does this say to them?
Yeah, well, it sends a very strong message that, you know, our partnerships and our friendships don't matter like they used to. You know, when I was in Afghanistan just a couple of days ago, I had a chance to meet with all the top NATO commanders from all the different forces. I was sitting around a table in Kabul with commanders from all around the world, from Germany, from Australia, from Denmark. And I delivered a message to them. I said that, you know, in the United States Congress, you know, we value the NATO partnership, that you're sitting here fighting, risking your lives just like the American soldiers are, because you are honoring your commitment to NATO and our partnership. I delivered that message, and right after I did that, a general from Denmark said, thank you. You know, thank you for saying that, because that's not the message, you know, we're getting back home. So, you know, we are strong as a country, not just because of the sacrifice of our service members, which is extreme and ongoing, but because we have friends. You know, we have friends, dozens of alliances and partnerships. We don't go it alone in the United States. We have friendships. But what the president is saying is we are going to go it alone. We're going to be less safe because of it. The world's going to be less safe because of it.
So on that point, Elise Labott, perfect timing to bring you into the conversation and look at what you've been gathering, the reporting you've been gathering among State Department circles. You say morale is taking a hit. How so, and how bad is it?
That's right, Mika. I've been talking to Foreign Service officers around the world, and it's pretty grim. I mean, there are a lot of hardworking diplomats working around the world to try and compensate, work double time to keep the trains running with these unilateral decisions by the president. But it's really difficult. You know, Foreign Service officers, as military, are apolitical. They follow any foreign policy vision of an elected president. But as one diplomat said to me, you want America first, we'll do America first. But that's always been there's never been any question that the U.S. president had American interests at heart. And now diplomats are concluding that the president has his own interests before the national security interests. And U.S. foreign policy, as you know, is a carrier ship. It's not like a little speedboat. And when the tail kind of swings, it hits U.S. allies like you've been talking about. And the congressman said in Syria with the Kurds, who were the ones that really were doing the lion's share of work. And they're not going to, not only is the U.S. not seen as reliable, they're not going to want to help us next time.
I can't imagine what the reaction inside the State Department is to this latest move by the president in terms of our Kurdish allies. And where is the Secretary of State in all of this? Mike Pompeo. Where is Pompeo?
Well, I have to say, you know, a lot of officials have said the revelation that Secretary Pompeo was on that call with the Ukrainian president and President Trump was a real blow. And it started this discussion among State Department officials, Foreign Service officers about where Secretary Pompeo is in all of this. Is he furthering his own political ambitions by keeping quiet and not speaking truth to power to President Trump? Or is he trying to, you know, he gets a lot of wild ideas and a lot of irrational policies coming across his desk. And is he kind of judging how to temper the most dangerous ones and saving his political capital? It's an open question. But as I said, it's pretty bad there right now, Mika.
So, Hans Nichols, you've been reporting with our colleagues at NBC about how this decision came about. Based on the NBC News reporting we've got from Carol Lee and others, it was pretty ad hoc, to put it mildly, that the president had this phone call with President Erdogan, and people on the call, including the chief of staff, were surprised by the decision made by the president and the promise made to President Erdogan, and scrambled to call the Secretary of Defense, for example, and the State Department to let them know it came from the president first without much consultation or any consultation.
And then the challenge was to get everyone on the same page and have it make it seem as though this was one unified policy. But guys, just the chaos of yesterday, the central tension of what you're seeing from the White House right now and the president in general is that they're arguing that this is really just a tactical move, that you're just taking about 50 troops and this is not that big of a deal. The president seemed to make that point at several points yesterday. But the broader rhetoric from the president is this is part of his overall plan to draw down and to get America out of these foreign wars. What we don't really know is what this means for the rest of the footprint in Syria, close to 1,000 troops there, what it means for troops in Afghanistan, where the president so clearly wants to draw down. And the president thinks that his party is with him. He was asked about this yesterday in the face of all that criticism from Senate Republicans, the president himself insisting that he actually has more support. He really only has one public supporter, and that's Rand Paul, who is a noted isolationist. And just to this notion of just the closeness of the partnership and how closely they fight, we did a story a couple months ago on these special operations surgical teams that go there and help the Syrian Kurds. They don't just wear the flag, the Kurds. They actually have American blood inside of them. There are stories of these special operators being down on blood, giving their own blood to their Kurdish brothers. This is a strong bond. Semantically, officials will say they're partners, not allies, but that's a distinction that doesn't have a lot of difference on the battlefield when the bullets are flying. Guys.
That's an important point to make, and the president said yesterday, quote, "I consulted with everybody." Clearly that's a lie. NBC's Hans Nichols at the White House. Hans, thank you very much. Congressman Crow, I want to ask you on a different matter, the question of impeachment. A new poll from the Washington Post this morning shows 58% of Americans now support the impeachment inquiry. There was a pivotal moment last month when you and 6 of your freshman Democrat colleagues with national security background came out in support of the inquiry. I know you didn't do that lightly. Do you believe the president now will be impeached in the House of Representatives?
I don't know. I mean, I think we have to follow a fair and transparent process. Just as important, if not more, than the end result is the process. I mean, trust between the American people and their elected officials in Congress is at an all-time low. And there's very good reasons for that. What we have to do is make sure this is an open, transparent, fair process, that we are giving the confidence to folks in our districts and throughout the country that good government matters, that we can actually do the right thing and put politics aside and support the country and defend the country. And that's, for me, what this is all about. So we have to make sure we're doing it the right way. And I think it's, frankly, I think it's inappropriate to say what we think the end result is going to be because we have to make sure that it's fair and we're going about it the right way.
But do you believe, Congressman, based on what you've already seen in that White House summary of the phone call with the president of Ukraine, in the whistleblower complaint, in the text messages that were revealed from the House of Representatives yesterday, and frankly, what the president has just said out loud since then, have you seen enough to impeach the president?
You know, I want to go through the process. What I have said very clearly is that, you know, a lot of these allegations, if they prove to be true, these are impeachable offenses. You know, this is the president of the United States putting his own personal interests in front of the interests of the country. It is a radical departure from our precedent, from history, from truly what has made this country strong. And it's a major national security risk. You know, it threatens our troops in Europe. Now we're seeing, you know, this pattern and practice extending to every other place in the world with respect to his foreign policy and national security. And that's why we're making sure we're following the steps right now to prevent it, to get our arms around what's happening and figure out what we need to do next.
All right, Congressman Jason Crow of Colorado, always appreciate your perspective. Thanks for coming on this morning. Elise Labott, thank you as well. Coming up on Morning Joe, first it was Russia, now Ukraine. President Trump likes to claim any investigation of him is a witch hunt. But a new book makes it clear President Trump cannot hide from the facts. That discussion is next on Morning Joe.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.